Good morning, good morning. All right, it's about 10:27. I'm meteorologist Chita. This is meteorologist Tim Pandajis. We are coming live. Of course, we're tracking Tropical Storm Nicholas. We have been tracking this overnight, and really the overall impacts, the main concern will be the potential for flooding.
Right.
And some really strong gusty winds, and most of that is going to set the stage of happening this afternoon through this evening and then overnight into tomorrow morning.
Right.
So before we get into the real forecast, we thought some interesting little tidbits with Tropical Storm Nicholas.
A few things have changed. Nicholas at center is acting a little bit erratic, and what I mean when I say that is that it's bouncing around. The center has been reforming in various locations, so it's giving it a hard time for the hurricane hunters to pinpoint exactly where it is, and that gets ingested into the forecast track, so that shifts, it slows down, it speeds up. We've seen that this morning. The forward speed at 7 a.m. was 5 miles an hour, then it jumps up to 15 miles an hour with this latest one. So kind of all over the place, but the general overall consensus is to the north, coming in our direction.
Yeah, that's right, for this evening, and it really changed overnight. So if some of you are just watching this right now live, you went to bed last night 10 or midnight, the track has changed, and we will show you the latest track coming up. But again, the overall track remains consistent with the potential for flash flooding. That will be the heaviest or the strongest severe weather threat as far as the potential for flash flooding. And then also with the winds, power outages, I think are going to be a big concern, especially getting into tomorrow morning. You have saturated grounds. You have potential for tropical storm force winds pretty much across the area.
Right.
So that is going to lead to downed trees and power lines and whatnot.
And you got to keep in mind where the storm currently is located. It's in the western Gulf of Mexico, untapped by any other tropical storms, warm waters, and it's got about another 12 hours or so over that warm water. So we do expect some additional strengthening, maybe getting up to a high-end tropical storm. Winds are forecast to get up to 70 miles an hour. Wouldn't be surprised. It's within the realm of possibility we see it pop right before landfall to a Category 1 hurricane. Overall, though, that change in intensity will not impact what we see here. We're still looking at a flooding threat, wind threat too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we do have this tropical storm warning. So what you see in the orange up and down the entire Texas coastline now with that tropical storm warning, and you can see why. I mean, this is expected to impact much of the state at this point, and even crossing into Louisiana.
And the good news is that it overall has sped up a little bit. It's still, with this latest update, the intermediate points are a little bit closer together. So it does slow down somewhat, but not as slow as previous runs of the models did. So we're looking at a prolonged rain event at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. It's a tropical depression just over Houston. And even though it's tropical depression, it still has a ton of tropical moisture that's going to have to rain out. Yeah,
so when we're talking about this, so it's expected to make landfall this evening, potentially now as late as midnight. I thought that timeline was going to be a little bit earlier this morning, maybe around 7, 8 o'clock. So if we push that back to about midnight, with an area of low pressure, or in this case, obviously, Tropical Storm Nicholas, you get counterclockwise spin. And that is what brings on the surge of all this tropical moisture. So that puts us basically on the east side, and it puts the entire city basically on the east side. So if we have a tropical storm over at this point tomorrow, or we have a tropical depression, either way, it's sending a surge of all that moisture that's just sitting in the Gulf, and it has so much energy packed in with it.
It turns on like the fire hose and just brings in the heavy rain. Here's how it looks on satellite presentation. This is the infrared. So we're gauging the temperatures of the cloud tops here. Why we use this as a tool is because the colder the cloud tops, that gives us an indication of how strong the storm is, how strong the convection, the thunderstorm activity is with it. When we're seeing a flare-up, a bubbling of the pinks and whites and blacks there, that's an increase in intensity. And it did die down a bit, but in the last couple images there, we're seeing some more plumes fire on up, so it could be undergoing some more intensification here in the short term, throwing all that moisture north.
And you know what I think is interesting? So it's now moving at a northerly direction around 12 miles per hour. So we were talking how our previous outlook was around 5 miles per hour, so it's crawling. And look at the little wobble, and it's just little shifts that can really impact which areas see more rain than others. And we're still looking at that landfall around Matagorda Bay. And again, that does put the entire area along the eastern side. Some of the initial forecasts with this last week were very split on exactly if this was going to be into South Texas, if that was going to ride right up along the coast, and we had a lot of discrepancy there with the European model and the American model, and now both are the consistent, and they're both saying, hey, this is where we're expecting landfall, as well as the National Hurricane Center. The timing of when it exits is a little bit off, but they're starting to become in pretty good agreement that this is is kind of how it's expected to play out.
Right, and overall the timing has been shifted upward. So I don't know if you could see this at home, but there's a little bit of a blip right there in its historical track. And what happened last night was very interesting, that it was pretty far to the south. And if you went to bed, you saw the storm. It's like, we've got some time. It's going to travel slowly to the north. Hurricane Hunter aircraft went out into the storm to where the center was previously reported to be, and they couldn't find the center. So they flew around, and they flew 150 miles to the north, and they found a reformed center, a huge jump.
I mean, 100-mile difference.
And that pushed up the whole timeline. Yeah,
right.
So that means everything's moving a little bit quicker than anticipated. And really, it's the hardest thing to pinpoint where a center will reform after it decays.
And so when we're talking about that things they have sped up just a little bit. So an outlook of a 3-day period, that can work to our advantage. So now we're looking at maybe we're going to see improving conditions starting as early as Wednesday. That's good news. However, even originally last week, the biggest threat were these rainfall rates that can happen per hour. So as they kind of start to ramp up this afternoon and evening, it is for our overnight hours that, even now our city officials, our mayor came on and said, we're hoping that by late this afternoon, early evening, 5 o'clock or so, that you are where you want to be by even early tomorrow morning. So you can hunker down overnight, that you're not trying to drive on any open roads late at night, dark at night. You don't know how deep some of this water is.
Right.
And we do have the potential later today to see those 1 to 4 inch rainfall rates per hour.
Yeah, and you've got these bands developing and pivoting inland onshore. So that's that fire hose we talked about. And we often like to show maps that depict the PWatts, the precipitable water values. And this is an excellent representation of why those high PWatts will result in very heavy rainfall. So what the PWatts are is we take the surface layer all the way up to around 34,000 feet, a column of air, and compress it. And we're not compressing it ourselves, but the models look at how much rain or how much liquid water would be in that column. But these storms induce widespread rising motion, so that forces all of that moisture to rise. And we've got PWatt levels over this area, like 2.5 to 3 inches. So that's helping to these
generate those
generate
really
that
heavy
rain.
downpours. It is, and also as far as those low-lying areas, we could still see some surge of about 2 to 4 feet.
Yeah.
So both of those kind of together, you really need to keep your guard up, especially overnight tonight into early tomorrow morning when you just can't see out there. We're going to be updating you all overnight tonight to let you know exactly where those heaviest bands have fallen.
And quickly, I just wanted to show this. This was the mission from last night from the hurricane hunters that shows them flying around to the south here trying to find that center, and then actually finding it well to the north there with its center reformation 150 miles to the north.
No, that is incredible.
Yeah,
it really is.
It's really, you don't see that too often at all. Now, rain across the area, Chita, has been heavy this morning. We're seeing breaks here and there. It's not pouring all the time, but this is getting filled in as we go forward.
It is, especially from really early this morning. We did have some really deep tropical downpours across portions of Chambers County and Galveston County early initially, and then we actually got a little bit of a break. So it is acting like waves of rain, and that's how these bands start to move in and before it makes landfall. So the initial wave, we picked up mostly about a half to maybe upwards of an inch of rain in some spots. There were parts of Chambers County that maybe picked up a little bit more, but now, you just see all this moisture in the Gulf. It doesn't have anywhere to go but north. So that's why this radar will continue to fill in.
Yeah, and you see these cells here that are developing south of Galveston, some blips of lightning in there too. Don't be surprised if you hear a rumble of thunder and flash of lightning. And in fact, with tropical systems as they move inland, they already induce that spin in the atmosphere. Potential's there for some severe weather, gusty winds inside of some of these tropical downpours, and it's not outside the possibility that we see a few tornado warnings pop up, because those typically flare up a lot more easily.
That's right. And think
systems.
even of a water spout. So we can get a water spout. Once that makes it on land, you have a tornado warning, and it's already going to be active once we see that. So yeah, you're right. We have seen that countless times here.
Yeah, getting a little bit of a break now with Houston seeing a downplay in the rainfall for now, at least, which is some good news.
And you know what? Any breaks that we can get along the way is actually really, really good news for the city. Any little breaks, it helps to recover. But we did across inside the loop and the Beltway, we had those really heavy downpours earlier. And look at all the moisture to come. So there's a lot headed our way for the afternoon and evening.
And we've turned on Doppler radar out of Brownsville. And you can see here as we play it out in motion, this is typically when a storm is close to the coastline, we can point out where the center is. And overall, you can kind of see where that is, but there are multiple areas that are spinning and twisting in the storm. And that's another reason why the hurricane hunters are having a tough time pinpointing where the center is because it's bouncing around under all these flare-ups of convection and thunderstorms and reforming a new center pretty often.
Yeah, which is incredible. But overall thinking, remember, you do get that counterclockwise spin, so that is what's sending all this surge of moisture our way. Here's Matagorda Bay. So this is where we would be looking at landfall either late tonight or potentially into the overnight hours. But this is all that has to be pushed ashore. And notice it's on that east side, that northeast quadrant, still really, really heavily packed with all that moisture.
Yeah, and it's just going to keep coming for hours on end. How much rain have we seen so far? Well, these are the airport recordings since midnight last night or early this morning. Over an inch in some spots. Again, these are far spaced out, and we've had heavy downpours in here, so we're likely seeing a whole lot more in between those reporting stations. But of course, we expect these to triple and quadruple.
Yeah, and we've said this all morning. You know, the good news is we've been so dry that right now the ground, I mean, that inch of rain that we have seen, maybe potentially in some spots, it's okay. It can handle that.
Absorb real quick.
It can absorb real quick.
Yeah.
So I think picking up your kids today from school, running the errands you need to do, upwards of 3, 4 o'clock, you're going to be okay. You know, roads are going to be passable, even if you're dealing with those heavy downpours. But I think after about 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon, that's when you kind of need to be in place through the evening hours, because one, you won't be able to see, and that's also when we're expecting the heaviest rain. Nicholas will be getting a little bit closer to making landfall.
Right, and think of the setup overall as being a dry sponge. You know, these downpours are trickling into that sponge, the sponge is absorbing it. Eventually, that sponge can't take any more. It's saturated, and you start to see that water seep out and become a flooding situation. And that's what we're expecting here, because additionally, on top of what we've already picked up, through the next 48 hours, another ½ foot to maybe a foot of rainfall or more in some of these heavier squalls.
I know, and if you're watching this, I mean, this is a lot of rain, and so it's tough to think about at this point when we're seeing some light passing showers. But by the afternoon, some of these downpours will have 1 to 4 inches per hour. So it is those hourly rainfall rates that quickly see those high water spots, and that's when flash flooding can really be imminent across the area. So that's the overall forecast is tonight, overnight, and into early tomorrow morning. We will be on guard for the potential of that flash flooding.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we get the ground saturated, so our flooding threat does go up gradually and then really kicks up overnight tonight with some of those heaviest of the downpours. Now, tidal flooding doesn't look to be terribly high, but at high tide later today and tomorrow morning, we could see that with the induced winds and some storm surge. And the wind overall, too, we're going to talk about that in a little bit better detail in a second, but the flooding potential here, Chita, I saw Addison post that this is only the 8th time this year, I think he said, that there's been a high risk of flooding issued.
Is the highest it can go.
Yeah.
So for all of Matagorda, Brazoria, and Galveston County, this is when you look at this and you say, okay, this is why schools were already preemptively canceled for today, even though the citywide will be looking at those being issued probably tonight for early tomorrow morning. But you can see, yeah, the highest threat level. Then once you head into moderate levels, that's for today. So even, you know, a huge area, a huge population is going to be dealing with the potential for that, even for today. And getting into tomorrow, now this is interesting. This has shifted a lot to the east, where the earlier forecast for tomorrow was actually including areas to our west. So that's just a good indication right there that we're expecting Nicholas to sit overhead, but then quickly pass off to the east.
Then move some of that moisture inland from there. And then even by Wednesday, still a marginal risk, not terribly high, but we're already saturated by that point. Any additional rainfall would likely cause some issues. So we've got watches and warnings up. I think these tropical storm watches have been either upgraded to warnings or still watches, but overall, everything is warning space now because we are within that time frame of within 24 to 36 hours.
And we do have that flash flood watch in effect through tomorrow evening. We'll see if they extend that, they expand that, but that is pretty much for all of our counties, with the exception of areas north of Harris County.
And the wind field overall with this is quite large for being just a tropical storm. The tropical storm force winds 39 miles per hour greater extend out about 100 miles from that center and mostly to the east. And that's another thing on satellite you can kind of depict here. It's a lopsided storm. It's asymmetrical. It's dealing with wind shear. So it's making it tilt over. And to get a strengthening tropical system, we need it to build vertically to ventilate properly. When it's tilted, it's not breathing effectively.
And I think it's interesting that right now the forecast has the winds at 70. If they're at 74, that will make it a Category 1. So originally, I really thought we were just going to have a tropical storm on our hands, but I guess, it may get pretty close to landfall where we may have a Cat 1 hurricane.
We very well could be. Now, overall, the winds, Cheetah, are going to be picking up, especially as that center gets closer. So as we go through time through this afternoon, starting to already get tropical storm wind gusts in Matagorda and Brazoria along the immediate coastline.
Yeah, but even and look at this, getting in, to 7 o'clock this evening. Some of these, when you start to pick it up, even areas within Harris County of those 30, 40 plus miles per hour, that is enough to knock your power lines down, your trees down, really cause some issues across your own street, your home, and knock some power out as well.
Right, and at this time frame, we're still not at landfall just yet. So even over tonight, look at the wind spreading inland. Katy at 57-mile-per-hour wind gusts.
And you can see the tighter the circulation, that's showing the center of circulation. And even though it is expected to stay a tropical storm through tomorrow, it does show gradual signs of weakening. But look at these winds. Even tomorrow through 6 a.m., we're looking at 30 to 40 miles per hour. Galveston, don't look at the exact numbers, but the overall general thinking of this is we're still looking at tropical storm force conditions, through 6 a.m. tomorrow morning.
And look at where this model is depicting the center. So here we are at 6 a.m., and I think the last time frame stopped it at around 11 p.m., so 7 hours worth of time. It doesn't move very far, so this model is kind of hinting that it might be a little slower moving than some of the other models are saying.
And that is an important key note to take away that Tim just said, because that means more rain across the area. The longer that this is sitting overhead, the more rain that it's going to crank up across the area, and the really higher risk for any flash flooding.
Right. And, there's that watch you were talking about earlier.
Oh yeah, it's in effect for everybody pretty much. Just areas north of. We'll see if they expand this for some of our northwest counties, if that track does sit and linger a little bit longer. But the overall idea, especially through early to midday tomorrow, would be those high water spots across our southern, southwestern, and then Harris County and Liberty County.
Absolutely. Now, the river gauges right now are looking okay. So this is the bayou levels. This doesn't account for poor drainage flooding or street flooding or anything like that. But it's good to see. Of course, we've talked about this, that we're very dry. Bayou levels have been low. So this can take a lot more water. So we'll likely see these tick upwards tonight with that inundation of rainfall coming on in. But for now, we're okay.
We're looking, and really our city, I shouldn't say city officials, but also county officials, they've had different press conferences, and they are in preparation for this as well. So they are looking at these levels, and they're going to do everything that they can to help mitigate that problem as well.
Right. And storm surge is going to be a problem too. We've got an incoming landfalling tropical system that's tracking to the west of Houston. That means everywhere to the east to the center we'll have prolonged onshore winds piling up the water in low-lying areas. So storm surge possibilities here, 2 to 4 feet.
Yeah, and that's the case all up and down the coastline. So if you're watching right now from portions of Galveston County or Brazoria County, you need to keep that in mind, especially areas that that flood really easily. Those are going to be areas that probably take on some water, especially late tonight and early tomorrow morning.
Right, and this is up right on through tonight. So we just went through the 10 a.m. full update. So what happens here is we get 8 updates from the Hurricane Center a day, 4 intermediate, 4 full. So we just had a full with the cone change, the track of the system. Next one up is the intermediate, and this is at 1 p.m. This is going to give us an update on its strength. Maybe it strengthens a little bit stronger than tropical storm.
It did the last update.
It did last time. And then if there's any changes to that forecast track, the cone will come at 4 o'clock.
So we have an hour-long show on TV from noon to 1, and then we're going to come back on if there are any changes with any of the updates that come back in at 1 o'clock. Of course, we will stream this live so you can see this on all the platforms. And we'll continue to do so through the afternoon and evening.
Absolutely. So we'll keep you updated on the latest track of the system and any rainfall warnings or watches that come out further. Until then, stay safe and stay warm inside. Well, it's pretty warm out anyway. You don't need to stay warm. Stay dry is the correct word I'm trying to use.
It's safe. Yeah, avoid high water.
We'll see you later.